What is up guys, Tim Murray here. Now today we're going to be looking at Guitar Rig 5 and the Djent tone that I used in the video you guys seem to really enjoy. And it sounded like... Cool, alright, now just get this back to center. And so I decided that I would actually go through this tone with you guys just because there seemed to be a lot of good response about this tone. It's actually a really simple tone, so I'll go through it step by step and kind of show the process that I would go about making a tone. So first of all, I'm using Ableton Live 10, and the guitar that I'm using is a Squier Vintage Jazzmaster Baritone. It's completely stock, haven't changed the pickups or anything. I'm using a thicker gauge string set. I don't actually remember from the top of my head what I'm using, but I will put it in the description if I remember it. And I'm currently tuned to drop A flat, I believe. Yeah, drop A flat. So now if we jump straight in, you'll see I have my chain here. And first of all, I don't actually use the gate that's in Guitar Rig 5. I'll actually use the stock Ableton one just because I prefer the kind of flexibility it gives, the settings. I like being able to actually adjust the attack and release rather easily. That's the only reason that I actually use the stock Ableton gate. You can use whatever the fuck you want. I just choose to use the stock one. Now, straight after that, you'll also notice that I'm actually using an EQ. This is an EQ before the amplifier that kind of allows me to change how the amp actually reacts to the guitar, if you know what I mean. I decided that I wanted a bit more of a boost at 1K before the amplifier, and I just really liked the sound that it kind of gave. You don't actually have to do this step, but when I was mixing this down, this just seemed to sound a bit better in the mix. Alright, now moving on to what you guys probably want to see is the Guitar Rig 5 tone itself, which is opened on the wrong screen. Whoosh, there we go. As you can see, I'm starting out by using a tube screamer in front of the amplifier. This is quite a popular thing to do with a lot of the metal and djent tones, and that's just to use this as a boost before the signal goes into the actual amplifier itself. I actually use a bit more drive than normal, and that's just a personal preference. I kind of like to find a good balance between drive from the actual pedal and the amp sim. Something else that you can probably see that I've done here is that I've used this little drop down menu to get a couple of extra little things here, and I have dropped the bass down a wee bit just because I didn't want it to sound a wee bit muddy in the low end. And this is what it sounds like without that screamer. Nice. Next off in the chain we have the Van 51 amp sim, which is a simulation of a 5150 amplifier. What I'm doing is I'm using the lead channel. I've put a wee bit of pre-gain up, and then I've used the EQ to kind of shape it relative to my guitar. Now this is an important part. Every guitar is going to sound different through this tone, and so the EQ setting has to be set relative to your guitar. I've boosted the mids up in my tone, but that's just because that's what sat well in the mix with my guitar. Now you might see that below this Van 51 sim here that I actually have this matched cabinet thing here. I've actually got this disabled because one really important part of this tone is that I'm actually using some impulse responses from Joey Sturgis tones. Not sponsored or anything, this came from a pack from the JST Toneforge Misha Mansour pre-order that I had. I just really liked how these tones sounded with it. You can use the normal cabs, or you can use your own free impulse responses from, say, Own Hammer or Two Notes Audio, but I just preferred these sounds here, and this is what it would sound like if I used a couple of different ones. Moving on to my post-processing, you'll see that I used iZotope Neutron. Now if I open this up, so now you can see the little changes that I've made so that this will sit better in the mix overall. Now the most important part of this is that you'll see that I've actually used a dynamic EQ in the low range here. So this band here, you'll see it change when I start playing. So you'll notice that palm mutes are triggering that dynamic EQ the most, and that's because when you palm mute, there's a lot more bass response coming through the DI and through the amplifier. This will muddy up your tone if you don't do anything about it, especially with Djent. As you may know, low frequencies use a lot more energy than high frequencies, so having this in here unnecessarily, it's just going to drain from your mix. Moving on, you'll notice that I've got these little cuts here, and that's just because I found a few resonant peaks that I didn't really like in the tone. This is rather common around like 4 kHz in a lot of these amp sim plugins, so just be mindful of that. Best way to check is to actually boost the level really high. And you hear that kind of like whistly sound there. I don't want that in the tone, so we just cut it back. Boosh. You don't want to cut it out too much, otherwise it might start sounding a bit average, but just listen to it, do it by ear, and you'll get the result that you want. You'll also see here I've put a little tiny high shelf just because I wanted a bit more high end in the tone, but that's just a personal preference. Moving on, you'll see that I've got a compressor here, and now this compressor is like a multi-band mode, and it's the low frequencies and mid frequencies are being compressed a bit more than the high end, as you can see from those little meters there. You'll also notice that I have a second compressor here. Now this is actually just an overall compressor, it's not multi-band or anything, and it's just a very subtle preset here that I'm using, and it's so that there's no real harsh peaks that jump through in the sound. It just keeps it relatively level, kind of flattens out the dynamic range a wee bit. And lastly, I'm using an exciter. As you can see, I've actually split this exciter into 2 different frequency ranges, and the high-end frequencies are being distorted just a little bit more. Now this is actually a really subtle effect, you don't want to go overboard with this, otherwise it's just going to sound like shit. And that brings us to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'm sorry if this was kind of a bit of a vague video. I'm trying to get used to actually talking to a camera and not having all of my videos scripted, so I have just been kind of winging this one. So hope you guys enjoy. If you have any feedback, let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.